The billionaire's fiancée rejected him at the altar, until the maid's toddler did something no one expected. Ethan Cole stood at the altar of the grandest ballroom in the city, his heart pounding beneath a perfectly tailored black tuxedo. At 34, he was one of the wealthiest men in the country. His name on skyscrapers, his company on the stock exchange, his face on magazine covers. But none of that mattered right now. All that mattered was the woman about to walk down the aisle toward him. Vanessa Grant, 30 years old, beautiful, elegant, and, as everyone believed, deeply in love with him. 500 guests filled the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above white roses that lined every row. Somewhere near the back, almost invisible in her simple gray dress, stood Maria Santos, the family's live-in housekeeper. She held the hand of her 3-year-old daughter Lily, who was here only because Ethan's mother had insisted. The little girl had grown attached to Ethan over the past year, and he to her. He'd asked that they be allowed to attend. The music began. Vanessa appeared at the end of the aisle in a dress that cost more than most people's houses. She smiled the practiced smile of someone who had spent her whole life being looked at. But halfway down the aisle she stopped. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan felt his stomach drop. "Vanessa," he whispered, stepping forward. "What's wrong?" Vanessa's smile cracked. Her eyes, cold and calculating, swept over the crowd, over the cameras, over the wealth, over everything she was about to inherit, and then something in her seemed to decide it wasn't enough. "I can't do this," she said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I can't marry a man who spends more time with his housekeeper's brat than with me." The room fell into stunned silence. Ethan's face went pale. "Vanessa, that's not fair. Lily is just a child. A child who gets more of your attention than I do." Vanessa snapped, her voice rising, echoing off the marble walls. "Do you know how humiliating it is, Ethan? My fiancé, cooing over some maid's daughter like she's his own. People are talking. I won't be a laughingstock." Whispers spread like wildfire through the guests. Ethan's mother, seated in the front row, pressed a hand to her mouth in horror. In the back of the room, Maria's face burned with shame. She pulled Lily closer, ready to slip out quietly, to disappear before she became the center of a scandal that wasn't hers to carry. But Lily, small and fearless the way only toddlers can be, wriggled free of her mother's hand. "Lily, wait," Maria whispered urgently, reaching for her. Too late. The little girl in her small white dress with a ribbon in her dark hair took off running, not away from the chaos but straight toward it. Straight down the aisle. Straight toward Ethan. Guests gasped again, this time in confusion, as the tiny 3-year-old dashed between rows of designer shoes and silk gowns, her little shoes clicking against the marble floor. "Lily!" Maria called, horrified, chasing after her daughter. "I'm so sorry. Everyone, please excuse her." But something in the room had shifted. Nobody was looking at Vanessa anymore, standing there in her furious, beautiful dress. Every eye was on the little girl running toward the groom, her arms already outstretched. Ethan turned, and his cold, heartbroken expression melted the instant he saw her. "Uncle Ifan!" Lily cried out. Her toddler tongue still couldn't quite manage his name, and threw herself into his legs, wrapping her tiny arms around him as far as they could reach. The room went utterly silent. Ethan knelt down slowly, scooping the little girl into his arms without a second thought, the way he had done 100 times before in the quiet moments nobody else saw. Moments in the kitchen when Maria was mopping the floors and Lily wanted to be read a story. Moments in the garden when he'd push her on the swing because her mother's hands were too full with work to do it herself. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice breaking. "You're not supposed to be running around like that." Lily reached up with her tiny hand and touched his cheek, right where a single tear had begun to fall, one nobody had ever seen from Ethan Cole in public before. "Don't cry," Lily said simply, in that innocent way only a child can manage. "I love you, Uncle Ifan." The words landed in the ballroom like a thunderclap. Vanessa's face twisted with disgust. "Are you serious right now? Even the kid is more affectionate toward you than I've ever been asked to be. This is exactly my point." But nobody was listening to her anymore. Something had changed in the air, something raw and real, cutting through all the wealth and glamour of the room. Ethan Cole, billionaire, was on his knees on his own wedding day, holding a 3-year-old girl who wasn't his daughter, while his bride stood 20 feet away, furious that a child could love him more freely than she ever had. And then Maria, mortified, breathless, reaching them at last, said something that would change everything. "Lily, baby, we have to go. This isn't our place." She reached for her daughter's hand, her cheeks flushed red with embarrassment, refusing to meet Ethan's eyes. "Mr. Cole, I am so sorry. Please forgive her, she doesn't understand." "Maria," Ethan said quietly, still holding Lily against his chest. "Don't apologize. Not for this. Not ever." Vanessa let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Unbelievable. You're comforting the maid now too." Ethan slowly rose to his feet, Lily still in his arms, and for the first time all day, he looked directly at Vanessa, not with heartbreak but with something colder, something that looked a lot like clarity. "Vanessa," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him, "I think you just showed everyone in this room exactly who you are." Vanessa's mouth opened to respond, but before a single word came out, something in her expensive clutch purse began to buzz. Her phone. She glanced down instinctively, and her face went white as chalk. "No," she whispered. "No, no, not now." Ethan frowned. "Vanessa, what is it?" She fumbled to silence the phone, but it was too late. Ethan's best man, standing just behind him, had already glimpsed the screen, and the name flashing across it made his eyes go wide with disbelief. It wasn't a wedding planner. It wasn't a bridesmaid. It was a name Ethan recognized instantly. A name that would blow this entire wedding apart. If you're feeling the emotion already, hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will leave you absolutely speechless. Let's continue. The name on Vanessa's phone screen read, "Marcus, villa booking confirmed." For a moment, nobody but Ethan and his best man, Daniel, understood the weight of what they'd just seen. But Ethan's stomach turned to ice. Marcus Reyes was his own business partner, a man he'd trusted for 6 years, a man who had stood in this very room not 30 minutes ago, shaking Ethan's hand and wishing him happiness. "Vanessa," Ethan said slowly, still holding Lily, who had gone quiet, sensing the tension in his arms. "Who is Marcus?" Vanessa's face drained of color. "It's nothing. A wedding vendor. The florist's contact. Don't," Ethan cut in, his voice low and dangerous now. "Don't lie to me. Not today. Not in front of everyone who came here to watch us start a life together." The guests, who moments ago had been whispering about the shocking display with the little girl, now leaned forward in their seats, sensing the true scandal of the evening was only just beginning. Daniel, still standing at Ethan's side, cleared his throat carefully. "Ethan, think you should know. Marcus cancelled his flight to Bali last week. He told me he had personal business to attend to here in the city instead." Vanessa's composure shattered. "Daniel, shut up." "A villa booking," Ethan said, almost to himself, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. "You've been planning a trip. With Marcus." "It's not what you think," Vanessa said, but her voice had lost all its earlier fire. Now it trembled with panic. Maria, still standing awkwardly nearby with her hands wrapped protectively around Lily's small shoulders, tried once more to retreat. "Mr. Cole, we really should leave you two." "Stay," Ethan said gently, surprising even himself with how much he meant it. "Please. Both of you." Something about having Maria and Lily beside him, steady, honest, uncomplicated by greed or performance, felt like the only solid ground in a room that was quickly spinning out of control. Vanessa's mother, seated in the second row in a shimmering gold gown, rose to her feet in alarm. "Vanessa, sweetheart, what is he talking about? Tell them it's a mistake." But Vanessa said nothing. Her silence was its own confession. Ethan felt something in his chest break. Not the sharp, sudden break of heartbreak, but a slow, quiet crumbling, like a building whose foundation had been cracked for years without anyone noticing. He thought of all the late nights Vanessa had claimed to be at a spa retreat. All the weekend trips she took with the girls. All the time she'd brushed off his questions about the future. About children, about a real home, about a real partnership, with a laugh and a change of subject. He had been so focused on building an empire that he'd never stopped to ask why the woman beside him always seemed to be somewhere else, even when she was standing right next to him. "How long?" he asked quietly. Vanessa's jaw tightened. "Ethan, please, not here." "How long, Vanessa?" The silence stretched unbearably. Then from the crowd a voice rang out. Marcus himself, who had apparently slipped back into the ballroom after stepping out for a phone call. His face now ashen as he realized what was unfolding. "Ethan, I can explain." "Get out," Ethan said, not even turning to look at him. "Both of you. Get out of my wedding." The ballroom erupted into chaos. Hushed, horrified murmurs, the clinking of chairs as guests shifted uncomfortably. A photographer in the back frantically snapping photos that would undoubtedly end up online within the hour. Vanessa's mother burst into tears. Vanessa herself stood frozen, caught between the man she'd humiliated and the man she'd betrayed, with nowhere left to hide. And in the middle of it all, Ethan Cole stood holding a 3-year-old girl who had run to him not for money, not for status, not for anything the world could offer, but simply because she loved him. Lily reached up and patted his cheek again. "Uncle Ifan sad." Ethan let out a broken laugh, somewhere between a sob and relief. "Yeah, baby. A little sad. But I think I'm going to be okay." Maria watched the exchange, her heart aching for him despite every instinct telling her she had no right to feel anything at all in this moment. She had worked in this house for 2 years, cooking meals, cleaning floors, tucking her daughter into a small room off the kitchen every night, always careful to remember her place. She had seen Ethan Cole in his most guarded, exhausted moments, the nights he came home from the office too tired to eat, the mornings he sat alone at the kitchen table before anyone else woke up. She knew a side of him that Vanessa, with all her galas and photo shoots, had never bothered to see. "Mr. Cole," Maria said softly, stepping closer despite her nerves. "Let me take Lily. You don't need this right now, you need." "No," Ethan said, more firmly than he intended. He softened immediately. "No, please. I need this. I need something real right now." Vanessa, hearing this, let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. "Real? You're choosing to bond with the help over confronting your own fiancé's affair? This is exactly the problem, Ethan. You've always cared more about people beneath you than people beside you." The word beneath landed like a slap across the entire room. Maria flinched as if she'd been struck. Even some of Vanessa's own family members winced at the cruelty of it. Ethan's expression turned to stone. He set Lily down gently, crouching to her eye level. "Sweetheart, can you go stand with your mommy for 1 second? I need to say something important." Lily nodded solemnly, toddling back to Maria's side and wrapping her small arms around her mother's leg. Ethan straightened, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire ballroom, clear and unshaking. "Everyone here came today expecting a wedding. Instead, you're about to witness something else, the truth. And I think it's time everyone in this room heard it." Vanessa's eyes widened in alarm. "Ethan, don't." But it was too late to stop him now. This story is only getting started, and trust me, what Ethan says next will give you chills. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss where this goes. Let's keep going. Ethan Cole stood at the front of the ballroom, 500 pairs of eyes fixed on him, and for the first time in his adult life, he didn't care how it looked. 3 years ago, he began, his voice steady despite the storm behind his eyes, "I met Vanessa Grant at a charity gala. She was charming, sharp, beautiful, everything I thought I wanted in a partner. I fell for the image. I never stopped to ask if there was anything real underneath it. Vanessa's face flushed crimson. Ethan, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. No, he said calmly. I think I've been embarrassing myself for 3 years by ignoring what was right in front of me. He looked out at the crowd, at business partners, at socialites, at family friends who had known him since childhood, and continued. For the last 2 years, there's been a woman in my house who works harder than anyone I know. She wakes up before dawn. She raises her daughter alone. She has never once asked me for anything beyond her paycheck. And in all that time she has shown more genuine kindness, more honesty, more character than anyone else in my life, including, apparently, the woman I was about to marry. Gasps rippled through the room. Maria's face went white with horror, and she took an instinctive step backward, as if she could somehow disappear into the wallpaper. "Mr. Cole, please," she whispered, mortified. "Don't drag me into this." "I'm not dragging you into anything, Maria," Ethan said gently, turning to face her. "I'm just finally telling the truth." Vanessa's mother stood, trembling with fury and humiliation. "This is outrageous. You're comparing my daughter to some maid." "I'm not comparing them," Ethan said. "There's no comparison to make. Vanessa spent 3 years performing a relationship for cameras and status while carrying on with my business partner behind my back. Maria has spent 2 years simply being decent, to me, to my mother, to everyone in this house, without ever asking for recognition." He turned back to Vanessa, and something in his expression finally softened into something like sorrow rather than anger. "I don't hate you, Vanessa. I think somewhere along the way we both forgot what we were even building toward. But I can't marry someone who thinks kindness is something beneath her. I won't raise children, if we'd ever even gotten there, in a house where love has a price tag." Vanessa's eyes welled with furious tears. "So that's it. Years together, thrown away because of one mistake." "It wasn't one mistake," Daniel interjected quietly from beside Ethan. "I found hotel receipts 3 months ago. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to break his heart before I had proof." "I'm sorry, Ethan. I should have told you sooner." The room buzzed with shocked whispers. Vanessa's mother sank back into her chair, pressing a trembling hand to her chest. Marcus, who had tried to slip toward the exit, found himself blocked by security, quietly stepping in at Ethan's earlier request. Vanessa looked around at the wreckage of her carefully built image, the guests, the cameras, the humiliation, and something in her finally cracked entirely. "Fine," she spat. "You want to throw away everything we could have had for some housekeeper's fantasy. Go ahead. But don't expect me to sit here and watch you make a fool of yourself over a woman who cleans your toilets for a living." The room went dead silent. Maria's eyes filled with tears, not from Vanessa's cruelty toward her, which she could endure, but from the humiliation of Lily hearing every word, young as she was, sensing the tension crackling in the air around her mother. "That's enough," Ethan said, his voice like iron now. "Vanessa, you can leave with whatever dignity you have left, or security can escort you out. Your choice." For a long, tense moment, Vanessa simply stared at him, as if trying to find some crack in his resolve, some sign that this was all just heat-of-the-moment anger that would fade by morning. But there was none. Ethan Cole had made up his mind, and nothing was going to change it. Finally, with a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream of rage, Vanessa turned and stormed down the aisle, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a collapsing white flag. Her mother hurried after her, and Marcus, released by security now that the bride herself was leaving, slunk out through a side door, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The ballroom fell into a stunned, heavy silence. Ethan stood alone at the altar. No bride, no wedding, 500 confused and whispering guests, and a wedding cake that would never be cut. And then, into that silence, came the small, clear voice of a 3-year-old girl. "Uncle Ifan," Lily said, tugging gently on his pant leg. "You still gots me." The entire room seemed to exhale at once. Somewhere in the back, someone began to clap, softly at first, then more guests joined in, not out of celebration for what had just been destroyed, but out of something like respect for the honesty that had just been spoken aloud. Ethan knelt down and pulled Lily into a tight hug, his shoulders shaking, unable to tell anymore whether the tears on his face were from grief or from relief. "Yeah, baby," he whispered into her small shoulder. "I still got you." Maria, watching from a few feet away, felt her heart swell with an emotion she didn't have a name for, something between compassion and a feeling she'd been too afraid to acknowledge for a long time now. But even as the guests began to quietly disperse, unsure what else to do at a wedding that would never happen, Ethan's mother approached Maria with a look on her face that suggested this evening's surprises were far from over. "Maria," she said softly, glancing between her son and the little girl in his arms, "I think it's time we talked about something I should have told you both a long time ago." Maria blinked in confusion. "Talked about what, ma'am?" Ethan's mother took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. "About why Lily has always felt so at home in this house. About something I noticed the very first day you walked through our doors 2 years ago. Something I've been too afraid to say out loud, for fear of how it might change everything. Something huge is about to be revealed, and I promise you won't see it coming. Don't go anywhere. Subscribe now so you catch every twist as this story unfolds." Ethan's mother, Eleanor Cole, led Maria and Ethan into a small private sitting room just off the main ballroom, away from the curious eyes of the remaining guests. Lily toddled along holding her mother's hand, humming quietly to herself, blissfully unaware of the weight settling over the adults around her. Eleanor closed the door behind them and took a long, steadying breath. 2 years ago," she began, "when you came to us looking for work, Maria, I hired you because you reminded me of someone. I told myself it was nothing, a coincidence, a trick of memory. But the longer you stayed, the more I couldn't ignore it." Maria frowned, confused. "Ma'am, I don't understand." Eleanor turned to a small drawer in the writing desk against the wall, pulling out an old, worn photograph. She handed it to Maria with trembling hands. Maria stared down at the photo. A young woman, perhaps 20 years old, standing in front of a small house, smiling brightly at the camera. The resemblance was unmistakable. It could have been Maria herself, if not for the outdated clothing and the faded color of the photograph. "That's my sister," Maria whispered, her voice catching. "Elena. She passed away when I was 16. I haven't seen this photo in years. How do you have this?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Because Elena worked for this family too, Maria. Nearly 30 years ago. She was our housekeeper, back when my husband was just starting out, long before Ethan was born." Ethan, standing near the doorway, looked between his mother and Maria in stunned confusion. "Mom, what are you saying?" Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Elena and your father were close, Ethan. Closer than I ever let myself admit, even to myself, for a very long time. When she left our employment suddenly, without warning, I always suspected there was more to the story than she let on. I never had the courage to ask." Maria's hand flew to her mouth. "Are you saying you think Elena and Mr. Cole's father?" "I don't know for certain," Eleanor said gently. "But when you walked through my door 2 years ago, Maria, carrying a baby girl on your hip, looking so much like the sister you'd lost, I felt as though fate itself was giving me a second chance to make things right. I never told you because I wasn't sure, and I didn't want to disrupt your life with speculation that might not even be true." The room fell into stunned silence. Maria felt the floor tilt beneath her, decades of family history rearranging itself in an instant. "If this is true," Maria whispered, looking down at Lily, who had settled onto the floor, playing quietly with the hem of her dress, unaware that the adults around her were discussing the very foundation of her existence. That would mean Lily and Ethan might be family," Eleanor finished softly. "Cousins at the very least." Perhaps closer than that, depending on what really happened all those years ago. Ethan sat down heavily in a nearby armchair, running a hand through his hair. This is a lot to process, Mom. Today of all days. I know, Eleanor said, sitting beside him and placing a gentle hand on his knee. I should have told you sooner. But watching you today, watching how naturally you love that little girl, how she ran to you without hesitation in front of everyone, I couldn't keep it inside any longer. Whether or not the family connection is real, Ethan, I think you already knew somewhere in your heart that Lily belongs in this family. Blood or not. Maria knelt down and gathered Lily into her arms, holding her close, overwhelmed by emotions she couldn't fully untangle. Grief for the sister she'd lost too young, disbelief at the possibility that her daughter had a connection to this family beyond simple employment, and something else entirely. A fragile, cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as alone in the world as she had always believed. I need to do a DNA test, Ethan said quietly, still processing. Not because it changes how I feel about either of you, it doesn't, not one bit. But because Lily deserves to know the truth about where she comes from. And so do you, Maria. Maria nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. I always wondered why Elena left so suddenly. She never explained it to our parents. She just said she needed a fresh start somewhere new, and 2 years later she was gone. An illness nobody saw coming, taken far too young. I was only a teenager. I never got the chance to ask her the questions I have now. Eleanor reached out and gently took Maria's hand. Whatever the results show, Maria, I want you to know something. You and Lily are welcome in this house. Not as an employee and her daughter, but as family, if that's something you'd want. I've watched you work yourself to exhaustion for 2 years. Always so careful, always so humble, never once asking for more than what was owed to you. You deserve so much more than that. Maria broke down completely then. Years of quiet, careful survival finally cracking open in the presence of people who saw her, truly saw her, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Ethan knelt down beside them both, placing one hand on Maria's shoulder and the other gently on Lily's small head. Whatever the test says, he said softly, you're not going anywhere. Either of you. I don't care what today was supposed to look like. I think it turned into something a lot more important instead. Outside the small sitting room, faint sounds of departing guests could still be heard. Cars pulling away, murmured gossip already spreading about the scandal of the century. But inside this quiet room, something entirely different was taking root. Not the ending of a wedding, but the beginning of a family nobody had expected. 3 days later, the DNA results would arrive. And what they revealed would change all of their lives forever. Can you imagine finding out something like this on what was supposed to be the worst day of your life? If this story has you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. The final chapter is coming up, and it will melt your heart completely. 3 days after the wedding that never happened, Ethan sat in his study, staring at a sealed envelope on his desk. He had requested the DNA test results be delivered directly to him, unwilling to have the news filtered through assistants or lawyers. This was too personal for that. Maria stood nearby, Lily balanced on her hip, both of them watching him with a mixture of hope and quiet fear. You can open it, Maria said softly, though her voice trembled. Whatever it says, Mr. Cole, will be okay. Ethan, he corrected gently, looking up at her. Please. After everything, I think we're past Mr. Cole. Maria offered a small, watery smile. Ethan. He took a deep breath and tore open the envelope, unfolding the paper inside with hands that weren't quite steady. His eyes scanned the results once, then again, as if needing to confirm what he was reading was real. Slowly, a smile broke across his face. Not the polished, practiced smile the world usually saw from Ethan Cole, but something raw and genuine and full of wonder. She's my cousin, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Lily is my first cousin. My father and Elena, they had a relationship back before he married my mother. It's all here. Confirmed. Maria's knees nearly buckled with the weight of the confirmation. Decades of unanswered questions, of a sister who left too suddenly and died too young without ever explaining why, finally had an answer. "So Lily really is family," Maria whispered, tears spilling freely down her cheeks now. "She has blood family. After everything, after losing Elena, after being so alone for so long, she has people who are truly hers." "You both do," Ethan said, rising from his desk and crossing the room to stand before them. "This isn't just about Lily, Maria. You're Elena's sister. That makes you family too. Not by employment, not by circumstance, but by blood in every way that matters." Eleanor, who had been waiting anxiously in the doorway, stepped forward now, unable to hold back her own tears any longer. "I always felt it," she said softly. "The moment you walked through our doors, Maria, some part of me recognized something in you that I'd loved and lost decades ago. I'm only sorry it took a broken wedding for me to finally find the courage to say it out loud." The following weeks brought changes that none of them could have predicted on that chaotic wedding day. Maria and Lily moved from the small staff quarters into a proper guest wing of the estate, not as employees anymore, but as family. Eleanor insisted on it, and for once in her life, Maria allowed herself to accept help without guilt weighing on her shoulders. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself re-evaluating everything he thought he'd wanted from life. The empire, the status, the carefully curated image he'd built alongside Vanessa. None of it had ever brought him the kind of peace he felt in the quiet moments with Maria and Lily. Sunday mornings making pancakes in the kitchen. Evenings reading bedtime stories to a little girl who called him Uncle Ifan with unwavering love. Long conversations with Maria on the back porch, discovering a woman of remarkable strength, humor, and quiet wisdom that he'd somehow overlooked for 2 years while chasing something far less real. Vanessa, for her part, disappeared from the public eye entirely within a month. Her engagement to Marcus quietly announced not long after, though without any of the fanfare her wedding to Ethan had received. The tabloids moved on to other scandals soon enough, as they always do. 6 months later, on a warm spring evening, Ethan stood in the same garden where he'd once pushed Lily on the swing during quiet afternoons when nobody else was watching. Except this time, the garden was filled with close friends and family. No 500 guests, no cameras, no performance for the public. Just the people who truly mattered. He knelt down in front of Maria, who stood in a simple blue dress, sunlight catching the surprise and joy blooming across her face. "I know this isn't how these things are supposed to go," Ethan said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "I know it's fast, and I know the world will have opinions about a man who was left at the altar finding love again so soon. But I don't care about the world's opinions anymore, Maria. I care about waking up every morning to you and Lily. I care about a home built on honesty instead of appearances. I love you, not because of what you can offer me, but because of everything you already are." Maria's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming freely as Ethan opened a small velvet box. "Maria Santos, will you marry me?" Lily, now 3.5, clapped her small hands excitedly from where she stood beside Eleanor, not fully understanding the moment but sensing its joy all the same. "Say yes, Mommy. Say yes." Maria laughed through her tears, nodding before she could even find her voice. "Yes. Yes, 1,000 times yes." As Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to pull her into his arms, the small garden erupted into applause and joyful tears. Lily ran forward, wrapping her tiny arms around both of their legs at once, giggling with a pure, uncomplicated happiness only a child can carry. Eleanor watched from the sidelines, one hand pressed to her heart, thinking of her son standing there in that garden, not as the billionaire the world knew him to be, but simply as a man who had finally found the family he never knew he was searching for. It had taken a wedding falling apart, a toddler's fearless run down an aisle, and decades-old secrets finally brought into the light. But in the end, Ethan Cole hadn't lost everything on what was supposed to be his wedding day. He'd found everything that actually mattered. Then, if this story touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe for more emotional stories like this one, and let me know in the comments which part made you tear up the most. Thank you for watching until the end. See you in the next story.